Yes, immigrants change America. Obviously, they change America.
But America changes them.
But America changes them constantly.
Changes us.
Changes us. And to miss that is to miss something that's really essential, not only about this story, but about our country.
Mi gente, buenas noches y bienvenidos a GBH. I am the daughter of a farm and migrant workers in El Valle de Texas. My father left school in the 8th grade, served in the Korean War, and moved with his family as far north as Ohio to find work over the course of his lifetime. My mother and her 8 siblings lived in a 2-room home with no running water or a kitchen, working in the fields in Texas. It took her as a secretary at an insurance company to realize her own dream of owning her own company called Lopez Insurance Agency. And she retired at the age of 85. She's now 93 years young. Yeah, I got good genes. I am the blessed daughter of Justo and Herminia Paz Lopez. My name is Sandra Lopez Burke, GBH Managing Director of Community and Government Relations, and my pronouns are she, her, y ella. We are so happy to have you, our extended Latina family, here with our allies to talk about the opportunities and challenges for the Latinx community in our community.
Many thanks to our collaborators who helped plan this event. The Latino Equity Fund at the Boston Foundation has partnered with us on 3 Latino events like this, and they produced tonight's superb reception. So let's hear it for Javier Suarez and his team. Yay! And Aitza is here as well, so great.
And Connexión, who came to us with the idea to bring in journalist, author, and professor Ray Suarez to talk about his new book, We Are Home. Thank you to Phyllis Barajas and Carlos Vasquez. We'd also like to thank the organizations that joined us tonight and provided the resources from their communities. Veronica Robles Cultural Center, the Center for Cooperative Development and Solidarity, Inquilinos Boricuas en Acción, Connexión, Mira Coalition, Agencia Alfia, and Maverick Landing Community Services.
You notice I gave her all the hard pronunciations, so. We honor the Massachusetts Wampanoag and Nipmuc peoples, whose ancestral lands are the foundation of our Massachusetts studios.
We value their cultures, contributions, and connections to our work and shared communities. And we commit to learning from and amplifying Indigenous voices through our public media mission.
As a Chinese American, I know that the future and fortunes of Latinos, Blacks, and Indigenous communities are inextricably tied to Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islanders here and across the country. Even if we disagree politically, we all share concerns about immigration, decent jobs, education opportunities for our children, and the lack of affordable homes. We know if one group gains ground, we all rise.
And here at GBH, we produce and feature documentaries and programs that speak to these issues, not only during Hispanic Heritage Month, but also throughout the year.
At World and on the PBS app, we focused on several films about and by Latinos, including From Here, From There, profiling 4 artist activists from immigrant families coming of age amidst rising anti-immigrant xenophobia. And the documentary American Exile details 2 Mexican-born brothers who, despite fighting for America in the military, are facing deportation.
On GBH and World, we are pleased to amplify John Leguizamo's 3-part documentary series, Voces American Historia, the untold story of Latinos. Here's a look at just 2 of the stories in this important series.
I received the removal notice in February. The first thought that came to me was, why me?
Should the people who risk their lives to defend this country be forced to leave it? veterans are dying without their family, without the country they fought for.
I didn't get married to live a world apart from him.
We're gonna keep fighting for the veterans so this nightmare ends.
Joining us is moderator extraordinaire, former longtime journalist at WCVB Channel 5, my alma mater, the highly respected Jorge Quiroga.
And while later we have a stellar group of community leaders to discuss the issues. But first up, we have a fireside chat with Ray Suarez, journalist for PBS NewsHour, NPR, CNN, and Al Jazeera America, as well as a professor and author of the new book, We Are Here. Gentlemen, take it away.
I've got to say, it is a real honor and pleasure to be here with you today, Ray. I admired your work when you were a host of Talk of the Nation on NPR. I used to listen to you on the way to work, as a matter of fact. It was a Latino voice on national English language radio that was profound in the insights that you offered. Then you went on to PBS Hour as a reporter and anchor. You now currently also host a podcast on shifting ground. And today we're here to discuss Ray's newest book, his fourth book. And you can see by the notes I've taken, I have read it thoroughly. We Are Home, Becoming American in the 21st Century. And I've got to say, the book tells the stories of immigrants in their own words, documented and undocumented, about becoming American. Your timing couldn't be more perfect. You could not have found a subject any more current or more controversial. Obviously, you've got to be thinking to yourself, it's amazing that this comes out at this point in time when immigration is such a wedge issue.
And it really is in the perfect slipstream with what I was trying to accomplish with the writing. I felt that the American conversation around immigration had gotten not just off track, but dangerously off track, removed from reality. When it gets to the point where people are being assaulted on the streets, when it gets to the point where candidates for national office are trying to turn other Americans against immigrants, using words like vermin and polluting the blood of our country, animals, I felt that it was really important to sort of pull it back from the edge of going totally over the cliff. And let's talk about the contributions immigrants really make day in and day out in the country, in real life, but also about what our shared future looks like. The fact that the demographic cake is baked. This country's changing, and even if we shut off the pipeline tomorrow, that change is coming. It's on its way.
We've got a lot to talk about, but I think I have to ask the question that I think it's pressing in everybody's mind at this point. Having talked to hundreds of immigrants, many, many Latinos, and to your point that you just mentioned, can you explain why so many Latinos are supporting a candidate that insults, denigrates, and spreads lies about us?
It's a great question, and I hope that I can come up with a great answer.
I don't have one.
Well, unlike every other major immigrant group that's come to this country, that came in a relatively compact number of years, everybody, Italians, Poles, Norwegians, Eastern European Jews, if you plot it out, there's a peak in their immigration and then it falls off. Latinos are the only large group from another place in the world that came not over years or decades or eras, but centuries. And finding a common feeling, finding a fellow feeling, between somebody in East Los Angeles whose family has been here 120 years and someone who just got here the day before yesterday may feel to a lot of people in the audience like it's natural or expected, but it's not. There are lines of language and class and education level of acculturation, and a lot of settled Americans of long presence in the country don't feel like they have anything in common with newer arrivals. And when somebody who impresses them as strong and macho and tough and willing to stand up to other leaders and so on and so on and so on, impresses them with those things, they're not thinking about the insults to immigrants.
To that point, I read an interview where a fellow was asked the question, a Latino, and he said, you know what? He's not really talking about us. He's talking about those people.
There we go. Isn't that it right there? That's not me. That's a human tendency. First off, in a lot of areas of life, he's not talking about me. But in this particular case, it's surprising to me the extent to which people whose own parents, whose own grandparents never mastered English or spoke with a thick accent or were excluded or faced discrimination, now that they're comfortable or settled, living in a suburb outside Las Vegas or Phoenix or Denver, can think he's not talking about me. Guess what? He's talking about you.
And to that point, really, everybody pick up this book. Ray's prose is wonderful. The interviews with people from everywhere, from Kenya, Ethiopia, Lebanon, Mexico, all over the place. It's just absolutely fantastic, fantastic stories. You describe today, to the point you just made, as America today as a less welcoming place. Yet over the arch of history, America has had a long love-hate relationship with immigrants. What's different about the current climate?
It's harder to get here, harder to stay here, harder to get legal status than it was 100 years ago, 120 years ago, 130 years ago. If you showed up at America's front door in 1880, as long as you weren't apparently sick, apparently mentally ill, or had a criminal record, which who did they ask about it? You.
Who, me? No.
You were pretty much let in, waved in. Industries were hungry for labor in western Pennsylvania, in East Chicago, Indiana, where Mexicans fleeing the Civil War headed north in 1910 to end up in steel mills in Gary and East Chicago and South Chicago. You got hazed at the front door, and once you got through that, they pretty much left you alone and started to haze the new guys at the front door. That part has never changed. We've always accused our immigrants of bringing disease and disorder and chaos and foreign ideas. That was true in 1880, it was true in 1910, it was true in 1924 when Congress closed the door and pretty much excluded immigrants from most places in the world except for Europe. Well, what we're doing now is not new as much as reverting to an old habit. It's like a low-grade fever that we never quite got rid of, so it comes bursting, flowering forth. And what are we talking about now? Disease, criminality, chaos, disorder. Same, it's the 1880 playbook, and it doesn't sound much better today than it did then.
You write about 1965 being a pivotal moment in the history of U.S. immigration, when the Immigration and Nationality Act was signed. Hard to believe today that this law was passed then with overwhelming bipartisan support.
You know, if you look at immigration law over the long haul, it's usually a bipartisan effort. The Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986, the Simpson-Mazzoli law that made nearly 4 million Americans legal, bringing them out of undocumented status and getting them green cards and many millions on the way to citizenship. That was done with bipartisan support. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1924, which wasn't as kind to immigrants, that was done with wide bipartisan support. We are now in a new era, a 50-50 era in American politics, and it's impossible. We haven't had an update of American immigration law in decades now, and that's one of the reasons why. One side sees it as advantageous to use it as a wedge issue. The other side is playing defense on it and basically saying almost nothing, kind of a rope-a-dope, hoping the other side will embarrass itself so much with what it's saying that they, in fact, don't have to say anything. They're making a mistake. But the era of bipartisanship is over, and instead, the era of disingenuousness has begun. Because nobody who says the only way we can fix this is with comprehensive immigration reform is telling the truth. Because comprehensive immigration reform that both fixes today's system and addresses 550,000 DACA young people and addresses 12 million long-term undocumented in the country and addresses the asylum system is such a heavy lift that it's impossible to do in one comprehensive bill. So anybody who talks to you today as if it's realistic about comprehensive immigration reform isn't being straight with you.
You also talk about the difference between immigration before 1965 and, very important to this conversation, after 1965. Tell us about the difference and the impact that it's had on the current.
Well, between 1924 and 1965, America had a quota system that was basically oriented toward Western Europe preferentially and all of Europe more generally. If you wanted to come in from any place outside Europe, it was quite difficult. After 1965, the formulas are changed, the quota system is scrapped, and the world is largely opened.
The doors are opened.
Opened much wider. So the large Pakistani population in the United States, the large Indian population in the United States, the large Chinese and ethnic Chinese population from other nations around the rim of China, all are really phenomena that post-dates 1965. Yes, there are Chinatowns in all old American cities that date back to a century or more ago. But those places were mostly places of male residence. And the reason they were small and compact and never got any bigger, all during the 20th century, is that very few Chinese women were allowed into the country. After 1965, Chinatown, I mean, I'm most familiar with New York. I don't know if you can tell, but there used to be a Chinatown in Lower Manhattan, just below Little Italy. Now there's one that's larger than that in Brooklyn, two that are larger than that in Queens, and another one in the Bronx. That's new. That's post-1965. So America really changes religiously. The religious landscape of the country is changing remarkably right now, and changing racially, radically, so that people of European descent will become the largest single population in the country, but not the majority, after roughly 2045. These are big, big changes.
When you talk about racially, you can say the browning of America.
You can. It upsets people, so you might want to, but okay.
I have to say, that has played into the kind of reaction that we're getting now, don't you think?
When you see thousands of young white men with torches marching around statues of Robert E. Lee, chanting, "You will not replace us," who do they think who do we think they're talking about? It's me and you, Jorge. They don't want me and you to replace them.
And you actually told me that's one of the reasons why you wrote the book.
That's one of the reasons why I started writing this book. After I saw the Unite the Right rally and what proceeded from it, I started to frantically, angrily type. My editor talked me off the ledge, and the book that resulted is a much calmer and much better book, I think.
You just made reference to your New York roots. You were raised in Brooklyn.
Right.
In fact, not very far from where I lived when my family came to this country. How did your personal story help shape the narrative of We Are Home?
Well, if you're Puerto Rican, this is your story and it's not your story. You're 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the immigrant narrative of the United States because by an act of Congress, voted on incidentally by no Puerto Ricans, Puerto Ricans were made United States citizens in 1917. And ever since, we've been in the family and out of the family at the same moment. So growing up in Brooklyn, my friends who had immigrant parents, I felt like I understood their lives. But my parents, my family didn't have to do anything but get on an airplane to come to the United States. And believe me, I understand that that is a critical difference. I'm not confused about that. I got it straight. But it is kind of my story. So as a reporter, I'm sort of an insider and an outsider at the same time.
In this book, as a journalist, you've always, I think, from watching and listening to you, you stood back. You never did opinion pieces, as it were. In this book, you've allowed yourself, I think, to offer opinions. Was that difficult to after many, many years of...
Yeah, I know. Look, it's breaking a habit of a lifetime to award yourself the permission to have an opinion after 45 years as a reporter. Yeah, it wasn't always easy, and sometimes it was more natural to slip into that arm's distance reportorial voice. But I felt as I was writing, and especially as the issue kept evolving as I was writing, that it might not be appropriate to the times. And I think I'm right.
You write about immigrants from all backgrounds, from all around the globe. When it comes to Latino immigrants, what threads do you see that tie them to other immigrant groups, and what unique changes and challenges or experiences set them apart? Are there any?
One thing that they have in common is the longer they're here, when they go back to the place they're from, elsewhere in the world, they feel less at home there than they thought they would. I can't tell you how many times immigrants from all different places said to me, yeah, I went back to my hometown, and I didn't know anybody, and I didn't feel at home there, and I no longer felt like it was my place anymore. That's as true from my father as it is for the people I profile in this book, as it is from somebody from Addis Ababa or Mombasa or the coastal cities in Senegal. True across the world, that they love going home, they want to go home, they feel like home is part of them, and still it's not home anymore, which is one of the reasons why I chose the title, We Are Home, because this is where their home is now.
I remember distinctly, the first time that I referred to myself as an American. It was not in this country, it was abroad. And I remember someone says, what are you? He says, I'm an American. And all of a sudden, I go, what? What did I just say? And I realized, yeah, this is my home. And it was so clear to me. So I can understand what you're saying. You know, today, some are pushing to restrict further immigration from Asia, from Africa, from Latin America, parts of the Middle East. What would you say to those who believe the U.S. already has enough immigrants and for sure enough diversity?
We have never been onto ourselves about the fact that this country has been a place of diverse ways of life since day one. We've lied to ourselves about that this is a multinational state and always has been. 3 great empires fighting a dramatic continental battle against each other for influence on the stage that's already owned by still other people. And that's not a multinational country? Yes, we don't use Dutch Morgan instead of acres in New York State, where the Dutch settled the Hudson River Valley. No, we don't pay bride price with cowrie shells in a Houston West African family that's arranging a marriage. No, cultures don't come fully intact and unchanged by life in the United States and continue to live here. Yet, those differences prevail in all kinds of ways. And language lives on in the United States in a way that I think we're still learning to deal with. Sometimes people will complain to me about overhearing a conversation in another language, or I've heard people complain about watching somebody having difficulty trying to negotiate something in a store. And I think, God, think about your own grandparents. Think about your own great-grandparents. Let up a little, will you? I mean, everybody needs some time to get over that old idea that immigrants don't learn English is baloney. Contemporary immigrants are doing language acquisition at the same speed as immigrants from earlier generations. And they're doing that while still competing in this rough economy. Right now, we've just come through a dangerous and challenging time, tremendous recession in 08 and 09, difficult headwinds after that. Hundreds of thousands of families lost their homes. People lost jobs and overtime and their sense of possibility. That kind of country is not necessarily a place that's going to look optimistically and generously and open-heartedly toward people who are trying to come through the front door and start lives here. You didn't hear about some of this ugly stuff in 1996 and 1997 and 1998, when there was roughly full employment, the economy was going great guns, and people felt that it was going to continue to go that way. There were already millions of undocumented people living and working in the country then. Were people calling them animals or vermin or saying they were polluting the blood of the country? No, it just wasn't part of the discourse. It's a pessimistic people that has the kind of conversation that we're having right now.
A complex book. A question from the audience. Joanne Murphy asks, were there any challenges in writing this book?
You had to set ground rules with certain people. One lady said, "Can you not use my last name?" I said, "Why? You know, you've been here a long time, you're legal." It's the people in her new place where she lives now don't know this part of her story, and she'd prefer they don't. So we set ground rules. One of the toughest interviews that I had to find was of an Afghan refugee, because Afghan refugees were frightened to speak with me.
The pilot.
The pilot eventually, but it took me months to find an Afghan who would actually sit and talk to me. I met several. I talked to several on the phone. I emailed with several more. They ended up ghosting or backing out or saying they just weren't ready to do it because they worried about their status here. Some of them are on something called humanitarian parole, not permanent status. And they worried about their families that were still back home in Afghanistan, who they're trying to get out of the country, and were afraid that if they spoke to me, even if I promised to use another name, that they would be found out and their relatives would be stuck in Kabul. It took a long time and a lot of convincing, and an immigration lawyer as a go-between who testified to my good faith and trustworthiness that got the Afghan pilot, who was a member of the Afghan Air Force before the fall of the government, to the Taliban to talk with me. He's waiting in Southern California to get his wife and his daughter out of Kabul. What a cool guy. Tremendous storyteller. And you could tell, I mean, at one point he started crying, how much this was making him crazy. He had gotten his sons to a bordering country, to Afghanistan. He had struggled to get his sons out, was having a really hard time getting his wife and daughter out, and it was weighing on him. But yet he was full of hope and optimism and a confidence, a kind of confidence. I mean, here's a guy, his late 50s, starting from scratch, starting from zero, starting over again. And he had nothing but hope about his future and the future of his kids in the United States.
And in fact, several of the folks you interview, in one way or another, say, despite all the hardships and obstacles, they say, there is no other place like this country. With, it felt to me, admiration. I don't know if love is the right word, but they certainly have been able to take the opportunities and that were handed or that they had to scratch their way to get.
It was love tempered by experience in a lot of cases. They were people who were grateful to the United States and in some cases marveled at what they had been able to accomplish. Jaime Contreras, who was spirited over the border by a coyote when he was a little boy. His father was marked for death by one of the right-wing militias in the El Salvador Civil War. He said, look, would I have liked to have had a nice life in my own hometown and not been afraid that my father was going to be gunned down on the street and go to school and then get a job and raise a family? Yes, that would have been preferable. That would have been my first choice. Am I grateful that this country let me in and let me prosper? That I was able to go to college and have a great career? He said, absolutely. So, you know, it's not one thing or the other. It's both. And that's what makes some of these stories so wonderful and so subtle.
You explore the concept of home, obviously the title, a word that evokes both comfort and struggle for many immigrants. Since you started covering the topic, how has the meaning of home for immigrants evolved?
I think for everybody I profile in the book, it is a term of constant evolution. The day they arrive here, if you ask them where is home, they would certainly tell you somewhere else on the planet. Even people who were leaving their countries in fear would tell you home was in Iran, home was in a tiny mountain town in El Salvador. Over time, they become more American because of the incredible transformative power of life in the United States. Native-born people who are angry, who are full of anxiety, who are not sure they want a single other immigrant in the country, worry about the power of immigrants to change the United States. But they give almost no credit to the power of the United States to change the people who come here. So they're missing fully half of the story. Yes, immigrants change America. Obviously, they change America.
But America changes them.
But America changes them constantly.
Changes us.
Changes us. And to miss that is to miss something that's really essential, not only about this story, but about our country. That's a wonderful thing. You know, there are places in this world where you can move as an immigrant and you will always be just that. When I spoke about the book at the American consulate in Shanghai to an all-Chinese audience, one woman in the audience objected when I said that the Chinese use the term foreigner in a different way from the way we use it in America, and we have a different attitude toward immigrants from the one that they have in China. There's almost no immigration in China. So at the end of the speech, she got up and she challenged me on that. And I said, you know, madam, I'm glad you pointed that out since I've lived in China. And I gave her my old street address, and I said, you know, everybody on the block knew I lived there. The second floor on 66 Uyuan Lu. If you asked them where the foreigner lived, they would be able to tell you right in the second floor there. And I could have lived there for 30 years, and no one ever would have said I was Chinese, ever. And that's the difference. That's a big difference. There was no way that I could become Chinese, but millions of people become American.
You had an Egyptian you spoke with, and he said, quote, he wasn't striving for acceptance, but rather equality. Is that what home looks like?
That was an interesting conversation because I thought that one common thread with all the people I was interviewing was that they wanted to feel welcome. All other things being equal, you would want to feel welcome in the place you live. And Dalia Mogahed, who came to the United States at 8 years old, said, you know, I'm not looking for welcome. This is my country. I'm a citizen. If I'm looking for your welcome, that means I'm looking for your permission to be here. And I don't need or want your permission to be here because I belong here. And I thought, oh.
I love that guy.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Still, people want to feel welcome. They don't want to feel the distaste or the exclusion of their neighbors. It's true. Dalia Mogahed, with her hijab on, is every bit as an American as anybody else on the street. She's right. She's absolutely right. All other things being equal, I would rather be welcome than unwelcome. I think we just had to disagree on that point.
Briefly, before we go on with the rest of the program, what takeaways do you hope readers, whether immigrants themselves or not, will gain from We Are Home about the challenges and triumphs of finding a sense of belonging in the U.S.?
In the last chapter, I mentioned that I hope that over the arc of the book, people are both grinding their molars, but also reassured about what immigration means to 21st century America. They should be reassured by how much the people who strive and work hard to get over and become part of this country do want to be part of this country. And maybe, you know, given their own feelings about how people get here and whether they stay and whether they belong, they might be challenged by some of these stories as well. Nobody's going to go hip, hip, hooray about Debbie, who is very upfront about the fact that she came to the country illegally and worked illegally for many, many years. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, I married a Puerto Rican guy. And, you know, and they both understood it was kind of a transactional thing. She was fond of him. They were good friends. They worked in the same restaurant, but it wasn't, you know, they flew down to San Juan and shot hundreds of pictures so they could put together an album for the INS agents who came to the apartment to interview them. Anybody who's gone through this knows what I'm talking about. So, yeah, I mean, she was a little sarcastic about all of this, but at the same time, her story was instructive. If not comforting, you should come away with that thinking, all right, Plucky Debbie, huh? But not necessarily saying that's how I want people to get here. And really, how many Puerto Ricans are there to marry? It's not an unlimited amount.
Well, we could keep on going, but there's more for the evening. Thank you, Ray, for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you, Jorge.
And one last takeaway. I'd like to leave the audience with a quote from your book. Quote, that despite all the obstacles, idealism and patriotism are in healthy supply among immigrants. You acknowledge that the country after the 1965 Immigration and Naturalization Act looks, sounds, and tastes a little different, but that for all the differences, we will still be us. I love that thought. Really.
Thank you.
Get the book. It's great. Now, Ray's going to stay with us as we continue the program. We have a short clip now that provides an understanding of the scale and impact of the Latino community, highlighting some key statistics about growth, contributions, and challenges Latinos face both here in Massachusetts and across the country. Let's take a look.
Latinos are the second fastest growing racial and ethnic group in Massachusetts and across the country. In Massachusetts, Latinos now represent 13.1% of the state population, while nationally, they are at 19.1%. Despite their growing numbers, Latinos earn only 78% of the U.S. median income and 81% of the median income in Massachusetts. Disparities in the workplace remain, with only 26.6% of Latinos achieving higher-paying managerial jobs in the U.S. and 30.3% in Massachusetts. Latinos still lag behind their non-Latino white counterparts, with only 20.4% earning bachelor degrees in the U.S. The figure is somewhat better in Massachusetts, with 23.3% achieving a college degree. A major source of wealth in the U.S. is home ownership. Yet Latinos fall behind, with only 32.7% of Latinos in Massachusetts owning homes, compared to 51.1% of Latinos owning homes across the country.
My name is Evelyn Barahona. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Educational Fund at U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, which is the largest national business advocacy organization representing the interests of 5 million Hispanic businesses across the nation. So something that needs to be changed about the narrative of the Hispanic Latino in the United States is the factor of contribution. So here we are, we sometimes hear a lot about the challenges and disparities, but I think what people don't realize is that we have an economic force that has not been elevated or celebrated enough. So for example, recently, earlier this year, I heard from the Latino Donor Collaborative that as a GDP, the Hispanic U.S. cohort is $3.6 trillion. And there is a researcher out of UCLA, Dr. Hayes Bautista. One of the things that he said recently was that the U.S. Hispanic, community is larger than India and faster than China. I don't think people realize the real achievement in that, because even with all the challenges, it just shows the level of resiliency this community has, and more importantly, the level of what I would say, like teniendo ganas, like having that drive to try to supersede your challenge despite the barriers. I mean, putting these numbers to life made me realize that we don't really celebrate this enough, and I think the time is now to do that.
Now, to continue the conversation and help us explore how we can elevate this narrative and work toward greater equity for Latinos, we're joined with an exceptional panel of leaders, including Ray, who are actively shaping these conversations. Let's welcome Rosalin Acosta, Managing Director of National Practice Leader for Labor and Workforce Development at Ernst & Young, Gonzalo Puigbo, Chief Executive Officer of the Somerville Community Corporation, and Lorna Rivera, Director of Gastón Institute for Latino Community Development and Public Policy at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. Also, for those of you here and at home that have a question, please either send it to them. We'll also take some Q&As later in the show, and I'll ask you to go to the aisles, and there'll be somebody with a microphone so we can ask the panel questions yourselves. Lorna, we saw the challenging statistics. In your mind, what are the biggest barriers that Latinos face on the road to prosperity here in Massachusetts? I know it's a big question, but when you think about it, what are the bullet points that come to mind?
Well, again, thank you for organizing this event, and Ray, just love your book. Wanted to point out that, in Massachusetts, the biggest barriers have to do with the fact that there is tremendous intergroup differences among the Latino groups that are here. We have a large number of Central Americans that have come here, as refugees or having faced displacement in their home countries. And we also have groups that are coming from South America that tend to have a little, higher educational levels, but still face these barriers really to work, to employment opportunities. We don't accept some of the credentials of some of our highly educated immigrants. And then Dominicans and Puerto Ricans that have been here for generations have very high poverty rates. The housing costs here in Massachusetts are extraordinarily high. The average one-bedroom rent in Boston is $2,300 for one bedroom. So housing affordability is a big barrier. And then education. There's a lot of differences, as I referenced earlier, with bachelor's degrees. We saw some of the statistics there. So definitely, education is the biggest factor in achieving economic mobility. And we still have a lot of those kinds of barriers with all the different groups of Latinos that are in Massachusetts. We're not a monolith. And so if we treat the groups as if we're all the same and come from the same context, that's a big challenge for us.
Yet at the same time, that we have these challenges, we also hear, and the wage gap and the housing gap, we hear over and over that Latinos are the economic engine of Massachusetts, that the immigration is what's kept the population growing in Massachusetts. Can a negative and a positive be right at the same time?
Absolutely. The Boston Foundation did a report on economic contributions of Latinos, and we're powering the economy here because many Latinos also are entrepreneurs, opening small businesses, and that's a huge contribution to our economy. We're doing the jobs that, there's a lot of occupational segregation in terms of those low-wage jobs that many, particularly Latina women, are doing. But at the same time, we're providing the childcare. We're providing the administrative supports. We're doing these essential jobs that are really, important for our communities. And so it's both, both and, right? Like this issue of, we're contributing, but we're also kind of invisible in terms of our contributions. And all Latinos are paying taxes, mind you. Payroll taxes is a big contribution. We're working these jobs, and we are paying payroll taxes. So we are making these contributions. It's just not, visible to many of us.
Rosalin, as we saw from the statistics, the decent wages and higher paying, for example, managerial jobs, they remain a challenge. What can you do? What's immediate that can be done to try to pave an easier path?
So thank you for that question, and I agree with everything Lorna was saying in terms of the challenges. But I really do think that we need to start changing that conversation, right? So I'm glad we're having this conversation now, because we've got to turn this invisibility quotient into visibility. In terms of managerial jobs, that has been a challenge for Latinos for a very long time. And one of the things that can be done, it's multi-pronged, right? It's policy, but it's also employer-driven too. There are a lot of us, growing up, when we were growing up in corporate America, and I spent 30 years in banking before I was honored to be the secretary here in the Commonwealth, and now at EY, talking about labor and workforce. But if an employer's policy isn't geared to training their people, especially those like me that, for many, many times you're the only one in the room. And where is the career pathway for Black and brown people in these corporations? So a lot of it has to come from internal practices that don't exist. There's been a lot of push for pay equity in the state. There's been a lot of push for more transparency on what, how many Latinos, how many Black workers we have in senior positions. How many Black and Latinos do we have in board seats? There's been a constant push, and we haven't quite gotten there to make companies more public about their transparency. But when I look at numbers like the managerial number, when I look at numbers like we were just talking about the housing and the income disparities, you have to have a baseline of measurement in order to know where you need to go from. So we have a baseline that maybe looks a little better here than in some other places, maybe not in certain sectors. But now that we know, those are the things we have to push on. And those are the things, whether it's policy advocacy, whether it's frankly more pressure on our companies to make sure that we are being more inclusive in not just our hiring practices, but our retention practices. It doesn't do us any good to recruit a bunch of diverse folks into our companies and then ignore them and leave them alone and say they'll find their way. No, you need a little more intentionality. You need a little more purposeful career pathways. There we go. It's late. Oh, sorry. Career pathways, so that the folks that you have in that may be a little different than the majority of the employees that you have don't feel like the outsider. They feel like they're part of that company and that they have an opportunity also to be a manager. And you learn a lot when you're alone. You learn a ton about your own management style and what you would want your management style to be like, because we all remember how we're treated, and we want to make sure that our management style reflects more of a unified, more diverse acceptance of the cultures we have inside.
We have a question from Javier from Waltham. I think it speaks to what you're just talking about. How can we and organizations create more opportunities for our community to achieve and thrive? And I'm adding, especially in leadership roles. You need more than good-hearted executives. You need people on the inside. We need to be there because there is strength in numbers.
Look, representation is everything. Representation, whether it's in politics or whether it's in the private sector. If you don't have someone at the table talking about your stories and your point of view, and just bringing you inside a little bit to cabinet meetings with the Governor Baker. I worked with Governor Baker. I was the only Latina around the table. So when issues came up about our community, I was really glad that I was there because I was the only one there to give that perspective. Others could sympathize, others could be empathetic, others could hear and quote anecdotal stories. But unless you are there at the table saying, that's not what I'm hearing from our community, because guess what, our community would talk to me, but they weren't going to talk to potentially someone else that they didn't bond with. So it was good to have me at the table.
And on the other hand, you had to answer all kinds of questions.
Well, you know,
and it would be good to
like,
have even more representation.
Well, it's really hard when you say, you know, as a Latina, because God, you know, I don't represent everybody. We are not a monolith, and it's
Right.
and we have that issue over and over again, whether it's in politics, whether it's in any kind of policy, is that all Latinos think this way. How many of you remember, and maybe I'm aging myself, I don't quite remember, I saw the reruns. Was it the Crest commercial or the Colgate commercial back in the 70s when they decided they needed to reach more Latinos because, you know, this population seems to be growing, and they had mariachi bands in all of their toothpaste commercials? I mean, okay, that was good for a certain population, but as Cubana, I'm like, what are they doing? What does this mean? So we have to be really careful not to be so monolithic when we speak about Latinos. And I feel really uncomfortable, even right now, even here, saying, oh, as a Latina, this is how I represent, because I'm not the same as everyone else.
Gonzalo, your background is a great story. Briefly, tell us the circumstances that influenced your work today to make homeownership possible for Latinos. What are the measures of success?
Well, for us, for Latinos, it's all about family. And for me, you know, growing up with my abuelos were very important, especially to all Latinos. I mean, I grew up in a private privilege, actually. You know, my grandfather was Secretary of Labor in Venezuela, and my other grandfather was a professor. But, you know, my mom always told this story that when she got pregnant really young at 15, being a single mom, that, you know, she didn't want to live under their shadows. That she wanted to create her own life, and she wanted to make sure that we followed our own path. So when I graduated in high school from Venezuela, you know, our goal, because this is my mom and myself, my goal too, was to move to the U.S. And start a new life. And I was really determined to do that. I told my mom, I'm going to do this. And it was fairly simple. Find a job, get an apartment, and, you know, you'll be okay. And that was a struggle. I didn't speak the language. I couldn't find a job. And you needed a lot of money to start to rent. And, you know, unfortunately, I became homeless. And I was talking to Lorna just recently about, you know, some of the struggles that the students are having at UMass Boston that are also homeless but still going to college. I mean, I was one of them. And I made a promise then that, you know, if I could fix the housing issue for myself, that I'd try to fix the housing issue for a lot of people. And, you know, like Rosalin, I started in banking as well as a loan officer. And, you know, believe it or not, you know, buying a home was an opportunity then. You know, when I started in 1998 in Somerville, you could finance a 3-family property for $300,000. They're close to $2 million right now. And families could do that. Families could buy a home and rent the other 2. I mean, that was the American dream. And most of the 3 and 4 family triple deckers were generally the pathway for immigrants, you know, to start their wealth and then move to the suburbs. And so in full circle, it was incredible because in my banking years, I was volunteering at the organization that I'm at right now. And so in full circle, I said to myself, I'd like to be in a place where I'm actually helping support and build affordable housing. And I got this opportunity, and we talk a lot about resiliency. And you know, one of the things that people don't speak a lot about is that there are not a lot of managerial opportunities for Latinos. There are very little executive opportunities for Latinos too. And when I got the job, I mean, this place was bankrupt. I mean, literally bankrupt. I mean, when I sat with the auditors, they basically said, you know, I don't know if you have enough cash for 12 months. We just want to let you know that what you're walking into. But I had already walked into that before. And I kind of knew, I know how to get out of this because I got out of this. And I need to support this housing system that has 340 affordable housing units and more than 50% of Latinos. I said, there's no way I'm going to let any of them, you know, go on the street like I did. And it's been 4 years. And I had another executive director who's not Latino, who basically said to me, I only give you 6 months. I didn't think you would make it. It's like, well, that's the effort of Latinos. You know, we make it happen. You know, and so we get the opportunities, but I also read an article, can't remember if it was called the glass floor or the career cliff, but the jobs that we get sometimes Latino on the executive have a lot of landmines. And unfortunately, we have to take those risks. But when we do, and when we have those jobs, we need to coach and mentor and support. This is why I love what Connexión does. I'm a Conexionista. She gave me the opportunity to coach and help other people in the future. And this is what we need to do to continue to elevate and support our voices.
And never forget that we're all in it together.
Yep.
Melinda from Rosendale asks a question to your point. I think it's one thing if you get to buy a home, are there any efforts to help Latino homeowners in keeping and maintaining their homes?
There are a lot of programs within the state. You know, during the 2008, I think as a loan officer, I was helping support a lot of families buy home. I mean, literally about 100, 200 families a year with non-predatory products at the time. You know, we're talking about MHP, we're talking about mass housing with down payment assistance, you know, the traditional way. The subprime world, in my opinion, not only killed the market, killed the economy, but killed, you know, the American dream, especially, you know, for members of our community. There are products out there to continue to support for rehab, for lead paint, but after 2008, I transitioned out of home ownership and into financial education. I think we need to better understand finances. I think Latinos tend to be a little bit hesitant, and I'm maybe a little bit biased on that, but I'm from my own family. We don't like to talk about money. Money is taboo, and unfortunately, that's what gets us into trouble. We need to start talking to each other, understand, and start working together within our own community to support and build a system where we help each other. I see it in other cultures, but I don't see it a lot with the Latinx community, and I'd like to see more of that.
I imagine having finances as a subject in high school, along with math and algebra and everything, would be very, very beneficial. Ray, you'll appreciate this as a professor as well, that Massachusetts is making strides with free tuition at community colleges and more. I think it's fantastic. What are the challenges and programs to meet these challenges that are available to help Latinos from kindergarten to college? Lorna, is there anything that? Yeah,
we're just, again, really excited that the Mass Reconnect is happening because many Latino students in particular, well, first it's access, right, to the information about finances, financial aid, but many of them are tracked really by their counselors in school to go to community colleges first. And so community college is a major sort of incubator, right, for opportunities. So having made community college free is gonna really, I think, be transformative for many in our community. For us at UMass Boston, we've been working very closely with Bunker Hill Community College. We're gonna be working with Roxbury Community College because we are going to be getting these transfer students coming to us to finish their bachelor's. So it's gonna be a life changer for sure to have free community college. But also what's important that happened in our state as well is the tuition equity. So in-state tuition. Believe it or not, we were one of the few states that, in terms of being a progressive state, we didn't have in-state tuition. This has been a kind of still very anti-immigrant sentiments in our state, particularly around that issue. So I think that also is going to be transformative. I know many of my students at UMass Boston, many Dominican students, We're paying out-of-state tuition. Having grown up here in Lawrence and other communities, Jamaica Plain, so this affordability issue is now, like a level playing field there. And I think this is going to be really an important thing for our community.
Yeah, if I can add.
Yes, of course.
I'm sorry. The other, I think, big advantage is the early college programs. Early college programs in the high schools, so that kids as early as junior year can sign up for college courses. And there are some kids that are graduating from high school with a high school diploma in one hand and an associate's degree in another hand. So talk about saving money. Now they're 2 years into college when they start as a third year, as a junior. Now that has to come with some social supports, right? Because an 18-year-old isn't necessarily ready to jump in a classroom with a 20-year-old. But the fact that they're saving that tuition, because these courses are free for them, and they already have completed 2 years of college by the time they graduate high school. I think that's enormous.
I really commend Massachusetts for making smart decisions in this area, but I got to tell you, this is going to be a battlefield in much of the rest of the country, where state legislatures are gradually pulling out support for their own states' college and university systems, where too many kids who have high school records that would get them into the four-year colleges in their own states are instead steered to community colleges and then find that all the credits don't transfer when they try to become four-year matriculated students toward a bachelor's degree in their own state's university system. They don't have full interoperability. That's a bait and switch. It's cheating the kids who are trying to get ahead, trying to get over, after doing the right thing. This is what we've told them to do since they were little kids. They do it, they get steered to community college, and then end up needing 5 years to complete, often in the families that are least able to support them through 5 years of higher education. Now that state legislators have gotten their own educations, they're only too happy to start to starve the colleges and universities in their own states of funding, even though they know it's an engine of economic development in their own state. If you were conspiracy theory minded, you might look at the fact that 2010 was the first year where a majority of the children born in maternity wards across the country were not white, and you know that in 2017, they will be 2027, they'll be applying to colleges and universities across the country. In 2018, they will be the majority of the entering classes. You'd think, oh, maybe there's some relationship between the world losing its interest in higher education just as a non-white student body is starting to move toward the system. It drives me crazy, and I really think that given the proven track record of higher education in lifting up American communities of all kinds, that it is like putting a gun to your own head to try to make it harder to go to college in 2024. It's nuts.
We have another question from the audience to this point. Given the current economic challenges, what steps or new programs should educational institutions and employers be taking right now, considering, as Evelyn says, that a Latino turns 18 every 30 seconds in this country? Is there something?
And not the same one, we should point out.
Just think of how many hundreds have turned 18 since we started this conversation today.
and folks want to know, is there something that you can?
Again, I go back to my personal experience, but when I was in banking, I wasn't thinking about getting a master's until I found out that, my banking institution would provide 80% of my tuition reimbursement. And that to me was a decision maker to get my master's, later on in life. And more and more, what I see is corporations doing less benefits rather than more benefits. And I think that's an important one. It should be back. It should be responsibility, if not of the private sector, certainly, the public sector for sure.
If I could just add that, one of the things that we really need to also be supporting more are out-of-school time programs, enrichment programs, after-school programs, nonprofit organizations that serve youth, because it's those spaces where the real transformation happens. I've seen it with the Heights Square Task Force, Sociedad Latina, TAG. These programs that I'm referring to in Boston, they provide cultural enrichment. They're family oriented. They're using the arts, right, as a way to engage the young people. They're doing community organizing. Those things, we don't have time during this regular school day, right, to do those kinds of empowering activities. So I think when we think about education and the preparation, a lot of that work is happening outside of the formal classrooms, right? They're happening in these community-based organizations, and with those organizations need a lot of support too.
There's another question from the audience that might be anathema in another part of the country. Even in liberal Massachusetts, there's been some serious pushback. How can we help undocumented families survive given the already strained resources?
Well, I can tell you what our organization is doing. And so we have a workforce development program at SEC, and our numbers have basically tripling almost in the amount of clients that we serve. We came from serving 200 families. We're already up to 500. So we would think that by the end of the year, it'll probably be 600. And there are undocumented immigrants that come in, and we serve all. It doesn't matter to us. And what we try to do is we deploy our coaches out in our communities and try to gain partnerships with local businesses that would be immigrant friendly, as we call them. And when we do, we try to make those connections. And what we see is that the majority of the people that are immigrant friendly were immigrants themselves at one point or another one, were challenged by the fact that they were undocumented and are willing to give a hand. But that's not going to solve the problem. But it solves the problem locally. But from a general level, I mean, I really think there needs to be something from a macro perspective, from a legislative basis, to fix the problem.
Realistically, are those families going back to someplace else in the world? If they're not, what is the economic proposition at the heart of denying them advancement and the ability to earn a better living and pay more taxes and buy a more expensive home and buy appliances and buy clothes and buy all the other things that a family buys at a lower level? What is the economic proposition at the heart of making it harder for them to get ahead if we understand that they're not going anywhere? Yes, they're undocumented. I get it. I understand it. That's a truth. But we have to at some point think about social utility along with the black and white letter of the law. If they're not really going home, and the average undocumented person in this country has been here longer than 10 years, they're not going anywhere. If they're not going anywhere, what is the point of making it harder for them to advance in this economy?
So that basically flips the narrative, suggesting that there are tremendous opportunities as opposed to a drawback.
You can look at them as a cost, and a lot of people do in their anti-immigrant discourse. They point out that undocumented people use, for instance, the public schools in a way that they are not authorized by the community to do. That's true. They are here perhaps using emergency rooms in public hospitals in a way that they are not authorized by the community that pays for that hospital to do. That's true. Nobody's denying any of that. Just the fact that they're undocumented means that legally speaking, they're not supposed to be here. That's a reality. But there's also reality involved in, are they really going home or not? And if the answer is no, you have to look at them as people who are either going to be potentially a larger drain on your system going forward, needing more social services, needing more police intervention, needing more inspectional and housing remediation intervention, all kinds of social costs that are borne by people who can't make a better living. Or they're people who, if you invest in them, will give a greater return to the society. I don't know. This is not that hard.
But Ray, I agree with you. But we've been stuck on this narrative and this loop, over the last several decades now, of scarcity, right? We're stuck on this loop of the zero-sum game, right? Like, oh, if we give it to them, then it takes away from us. We are a country of riches and abundance. And the only reason, and I think, Jorge, you said it this at the beginning, the only reason we've been growing it all at least in Massachusetts, has been because of the Latino influence and influx that we've had here in this country. If you look at, Latino entrepreneurship, we're growing at 34% more than our than the non-Hispanic population, growing at 1%. So we have an abundance of riches and an abundance that we give. Now, this question about legality is a policy choice. It's a legal choice. And in the state, it was always very frustrating because if you did not have a work authority, a work permit, our career centers, which are 29 career centers in Massachusetts, were not allowed to help that undocumented immigrant find work because those programs are federally funded. So anything that's federally funded, you can't touch an undocumented undocumented person. And so it falls on our nonprofit organizations. It falls on them, to do all the work with the little resources that they have. And it is not a sustainable model. And I agree with you. They're not going anywhere. And we're just pretending that they are. And we're pretending that we're going to be tough on immigration. Since when does this country shut their door the way that we're trying to shut our door right now? And look, I agree that we need to have systems. We need to have systems in place. We need to have security at our borders, all of that. But the fact that these folks are here and they want to work, the thing that and I'm sure you saw that in your book, Ray, as you interviewed, and I loved your book, by the way. I loved it. You know that. There is an enormous work ethic. So this myth that immigrants come here to suck off the land, and this myth that we're just here for handouts, it's just so insulting to 20% of the population in this country, and it is a matter of policy, and that's why voting matters. So,
and the system just makes it, from my reading, very, very complicated. There's nothing simple about trying to get legal status. Ray, I remember a story that you told about being with one family, and there were a number of people there, and there were like 10 different legal statuses that they had, from being citizens to residents with a green card, without a green card. This one's waiting to get a green card from her husband, who's waiting in line. Am I exaggerating that story?
No, the family had 4 children. 2 were born in Mexico, 2 were born in the United States, and not in the predictable order that you might feel. No. The family had moved back and forth across the border, depending on where there were more jobs and more opportunity. So the older children actually were legal residents, citizens, and the younger children had been born when the family had moved back to Mexico. And one brother was a DACA activist. So I asked his sister, well, hey, your brother's an activist. Did you apply for it? She said, no, I'm 90 days too old to apply for DACA. But I'm trying to get legal through my husband. I said, oh, I thought the conversation was going to take an optimistic turn. So I said, oh, your husband's he's in the system already? Yes. How long since he began? 13 years. So if you tell people to go home and get on the back of the line, there is no line. And to the extent that a line exists, it doesn't move at in a length of time that's relevant to the lifetime of human beings. I was interviewing an Indian guy who had been here on an H-1B visa. His employer went out of business, went bankrupt, and at that moment, the clock begins ticking. You have to go home if your employer no longer employs you, and that employer no longer existed. He managed, with just a couple of days to spare, to keep his legal status under a new visa, this one set aside for Kate Blanchett and Ewan McGregor and movie stars who come to Hollywood to work as foreign citizens. I said, well, Pranav, don't you want a green card? Don't you want to be a legal permanent resident? He said, yes, of course I do. Given the size of the Indian quota, if I start the pursuit of a green card now, I will get mine in 100 years. And I thought he was just being hyperbolic and exaggerating for emphasis, and he said, no, it's 100 years, given how many people have already applied, how many they give every year. So I said, well, how old are you? And he said, well, I'm 31. I said, well, it gives you something to live for.
I'm getting the cue that we have some questions from the audience. There's a microphone over here. If you have a question, please go to the microphone.
Okay, you have to walk.
Go ahead.
My name is Nelson Salazar, and I can spend 3 hours with addressing all the themes that have come up here tonight. One of them is for many people on the East, we tend to talk about all the immigrants, but then if you go to the side of the West, a lot of people say we're not immigrants, we were here, all the Mexicans. But here in the East, we don't understand that concept. So there are people who were on this side already when the United States took over all the land of all the other states, New Mexico, California. On the other one is, I am a product of the Immigration Reform Act in 1986. I am from El Salvador. And the fact that you think that I don't have a home or that I don't feel a home, I do. Many of us who came to the United States back in the 80s, we were forced to leave because of the political issues. Many of us are now retiring. Many of us are going back to El Salvador. So it's not really that I don't feel like I'm home. When I go home, it is my home. When I'm here, it is my home.
And specifically, what is your question? I love the
I
point.
can tell
I
you,
love the point you're making.
And just to end, because I know I can go on, I think that if we look at here in Massachusetts, a lot of these higher positions are run either by Cubans or by Puerto Ricans, Dominicans. A lot of us Salvadorans or Central Americans, if you look around, you don't see that many opportunities. So it's easy to talk about we don't have the opportunities. The Gastón Institute was started by a Cuban, and now it's always been run by Puerto Ricans. So I want you to think about when we talk about this, because sometimes we talk about it, but we don't really reflect on what really is going on within ourselves. Thank you.
Well, I think that is well said, and I think that's one of the things that we were, I think, trying to communicate a little bit about. It's very dangerous to just put us under a label of Latinos, right? It's very dangerous to say, oh, and all Latinos feel this way, because we are a beautiful mosaic of people. We are of all different. We saw it right now if you were here for the dancing. right before this program. I actually was like, oh, what country is that? I was like, I'm Latina. I didn't even know, right? So just because I'm Latina, I knew the salsa. Just because I'm Latina doesn't mean I know the dance cultures of every single country. So we are a beautiful mosaic of richness and difference. So I respect what you're saying, and it's very dangerous for us to speak in a monolithic voice.
I was referring more about the opportunities that we keep within here in Massachusetts. We're kept, it's always either it's a Puerto Rican, Cuban, a Dominican, because they're the oldest groups that have been in the state.
I think there's more of them, and I know you have the statistics. So there's although the Cubans are tight, there's only 2 of us in this room, and it's Roberto, myself, right? So there's only 2 Cubans.
Albertico, you have a question. I recognize.
Yeah. So, first of all, Ray, thank you for coming to Boston again. I hope you continue to come, because each time I've come, I've learned so much. So, Phyllis, you deserve a lot of credit. Connexión for putting this together. Please don't stop, and let's make sure everybody spreads the word of how incredibly, productive these are. So my question is, Ray, you've done a lot of research on immigration here in the United States. But my question is, have you compared or looked around the world? Because when I look around the world, tell me who's doing it right. I see Hungary, the prime minister saying, we don't want anybody coming in. We have we have a very homogenous Switzerland and Sweden, these countries that have a very high quality of life, are very homogenous. They don't really embrace diversity. You read in the news 2 weeks ago, Dominican Republic is now deporting 10,000 Haitians a day. You know the anti-Venezuelan sentiment that is in Ecuador and Colombia because of migration. So, and we know how Mexicans treat other Guatemalans, Nicaraguans, et cetera. Who's doing it better or right than us?
This is a challenge, as you suggest, all around the world. In 2 German states, right-wing parties enjoyed their greatest electoral success ever because of the anxiety about the large number of immigrants who came in from the Middle East about 10 years ago now. Turkey, Greece, Italy. Is wrestling with the large flow of people from the Eastern Mediterranean fleeing the chaos and the terrible privation in their countries. There are hundreds of thousands of Burmese in Bangladesh and Sudanese in South Sudan, and on and on and on. Canada, it will almost inevitably change its government in its next election, in part because of the backlash against a fairly liberal immigration system there. Australia has been wrestling with this for many years. Britain had, they voted to leave the European Union as part of its backlash toward immigration, and continues now to wrestle with this as migrants keep coming by boat across the English Channel. This is a worldwide event. It's one that's putting strains on national systems all around the world. If there's any place that's doing it well or less well, it's really hard to tell because nobody's happy about it anywhere. Whether it's the richest countries in the world, in Europe, East and West, whether it's in the fastest growing economies in the world, in Southeast Asia or in China. China accepts virtually no immigrants. Nobody's moving to Russia. Right now, Eastern Europe is straining under the weight of 4 million Ukrainian refugees. So the world's kind of stretched right now. I can't really point to many examples of places that are doing it much better than the United States. I only wish the United States had seen itself as part of that global phenomenon instead of always seeing itself, as it always does, as utterly removed from the problems of the rest of the world. We're acting all crazy because Venezuelans are coming in. not recognizing that 1/4 of the entire population of Venezuela has left the country. That's 11 million people, and most of them are in Colombia and Peru and Ecuador. And there's not stories on the NBC Nightly News about that. There is a worldwide crisis from people on the move. We don't have a good, durable set of answers for it anywhere, but the United States is part of the world, not removed from the problems of the world.
I've got a point here that was made, I think, about the fragmentation of the Latino community, a point well taken. Let's talk about how race impacts Latinos differently, especially here in Massachusetts, having such a large population from the Dominican Republic who self-identify as Afro-Latinos. Special challenges?
Yeah, Massachusetts, the Gastón Institute did a report on Afro-Latinos, and we really do have about 5% of the Latino population identifies as Afro-Latinos. And we know that when we look at the health outcomes for, the census of the Black Hispanic population, that the negative outcomes are very similar to the experiences of Black Americans. So there's a lot of racial profiling as well, that there's been research done on that. But even, the question that, Nelson Salazar raised of representation is also, we don't have Afro-Latinos too represented in many of our leadership within the executive boards and the leadership. So that's also a population that, where the identity, right, of identifying as Black is going to become even more invisible with the change in the census, the future census, how we're going to be undercounting now the numbers of Afro-Latinos. So it's an issue that persists of anti-Blackness in our community that we don't want to recognize.
Another question?
Yes, hi. My name is Don Carlson. I'm president of an organization called Power of Jobs. It's a new nonprofit that's trying to connect people of color, job seekers with job providers. We're just starting up. One of the things that I noted in one of the visual presentations here was the wage gap. And it seems to me that a fundamental part of the wage gap is a lack of skills of people that perhaps in communities of color. Now, it's a very easy solution to that. Skills can be taught, skills can be learned. In Massachusetts, there are a number of nonprofits that provide free job skills training, but there's far, far from enough. How can we convince our legislators to open the purse strings to provide much more job skills training for people to help close that wage gap?
I love that question. So thank you for asking that question. And, we right now have, and it's about to end, have had an abundance of resources with ARPA funds, right? ARPA funds came in, and I can tell you that when I was in office, we had $250 million that we could use specifically for workforce training funds. So that money was used in all kinds of ways, and this administration has carried on that work, whether it was hiring more clinicians, whether it was hiring more folks into behavioral health, whether it was expanding our programs, for example, in our vocational schools, so that the vocational schools stay open for 3 shifts, not 1 shift, so that schools don't close at 2 o'clock. They open from 8 to 2 for those vocational students that were there, from 2 to 5 for other high school kids that wanted to be in the trades or wanted to learn manufacturing, and they were bused to these vocational schools. And then from 5 to 8 or 6 to 9, whatever the school chose, the community was able to go in for free and learn a trade. And then from there, they were connected to employers. Now, the cliff that we're going to see, unfortunately, coming soon is that these ARPA funds needed to be encumbered by the end of this year by 2024. Otherwise, they're lost and they go back to the feds. Even if you were a great state and you used every penny of those funds, what's going to happen now is that, you know, we funded these training programs to a pretty significant level. That was a one-time only money, right? So the budget now is going to see some pretty severe decline, unfortunately, in some of those workforce funds. So that's one challenge, right, that the state will have to face, the nonprofits will have to face, the school systems will have to face. But that connection between the vocational schools, the community colleges, or the vocational schools and the four-year colleges, that's where we have, I think, some of the most broken policies and where we need to work the hardest. And I know this administration is working very hard at that, as was the last. But that bridge between education and workforce has not been built as strongly as it needs to be built. And frankly, we need to start exposing our kids to careers, not in high school, but in middle school or earlier. Because when you ask a kid that's in 5th grade, what do you want to be when you grow up? They usually say, fireman, policeman, doctor, teacher. Nothing wrong with those occupations, but you know that there are thousands of other occupations that they've never even heard of because they haven't been exposed. So this entire skills gap thing is real, and we're not the only ones grappling with this. The entire country is grappling with skills gaps, and that's where I would submit to you that programs like apprenticeship programs that the unions have been using for decades, for 100 years, right? They work. They absolutely work. Where you can learn and earn at the same time creates an enormous amount of loyalty with the employee and the employer, and the employer gets to sort of test drive this employee. Do I really want this person in my shop? But apprenticeship programs, I think, are very much a great equalizer. I urge employers all the time when they're having trouble finding skilled workers, look at an apprenticeship program, because then you teach them your way of working, and you have an employee that is now so loyal to you because you have given them money to learn, and then they stay with you. It's a 1-year program, and 6 months of curriculum, 6 months of on-the-job training. And it's a great way to start closing some of that skills gap. So,
I think we have time. Another question?
Thank you for this opportunity. It has been really amazing. The United States is my home. I'm an immigrant from El Salvador as well. I came when I was 17 years old, not speaking a word of English. When I went to my counselor and I said, I want to go to college, he said, you? But then there was a teacher who pointed me to, I actually arrived in New York, so I live in New York. New York had a very interesting program that the teacher pointed me to, Education Opportunity Program, that helps those underrepresented students that want to go to college. And that program helped me. I graduated with a business in finance and computer science. I completed a Harvard Business School executive program last year, and an MIT advanced management program, also the same one, this year. And I'm starting my own startup soon. So my question to you, I applaud that we are going to have the 2 years free, but why we can encourage people or community or students to go to 4-year college? I mean, we need more leaders. 4-year programs goes fast. Why we cannot do that in Massachusetts?
You're looking at me, so
you take that one.
I would say to you that there's no discouragement for students to do 4 years.
Well, the cost is a discouragement.
But if you look at the programs that Massachusetts has implemented, for example, if you do go to a community college for 2 years, that saves an enormous amount of tuition right there. And then there's a program called Mass Connect. so that part of that tuition is, I think, is free for the 4-year, but then there's dorm costs, et cetera. There is, it's not a this or that. It's a both and. I mean, there is no reason why you should not go to 4-year school if you've been through to community college. I don't think that's what the programs are saying. And we also know that in every single recession we've had, people that have bachelor's degrees and over do much better recovering from that recession than people with just the high school degree, and then a little bit better if you have an associate's degree. So we should be encouraging higher education. But there's also more than one way to do it. There's also more than one pathway. Like Gonzalo said, I mean, he went to school later. He got his advanced degree later, but he got his employer paid for it. 80% of the tuition was paid for. So I want us to stop thinking in such binary ways. I mean, you can go to vocational school, you can go into the trades, you can become an electrician, and then you can study to be an engineer. So I think it's really important that we stop thinking, if you do this, you can't do that. And I think our community colleges are outstanding. I think they're doing a terrific job. I'm a huge proponent of the work that they're doing. But I think that we just need better bridges. But I'm with you. Look, the more educated, the better. Because if we're going to be the minority workforce in this country in the next 10, 20 years, we need to be prepared as leaders, and we need to make sure that because if we're not prepared, the whole economy goes to shit, right? I mean, we have to be prepared because we are going to be leading this country, and that's the way we have to start thinking.
Thank you. And on that generally positive note, I think we can continue the conversation and the reception afterwards. I certainly want to thank you, Ray, Rosalin, Gonzalo, Lorna, and a special thanks to the audience here tonight for your commitment, from where I sit as I've watched, for your commitment to develop, nurture, and promote excellence and opportunity for Latinos all 12 months of the year. Now, back to Liz and Sandra.
How about another round of applause for Jorge and Ray and Rosalin, Lorna, Gonzalo, and Evelyn, and special thanks to the Latino Equity Fund and Connexión, and everyone you see on here in the logos, including our funder, Barr Foundation. So, it really takes a village to do an event like this tonight.
And with that village, I do want to, again, appreciate and just thank so much. And I know some of them are here in our audience. Those who joined us this evening with their resource tables, Veronica Robles Cultural Center, the Center for Cooperative Development and Solidarity, Agencia Alpha, Maverick Landing Community Services, Inquilos Boricuas en Acción, Connexión, and Mira Coalition. Thank you so much.
And I also want to thank the GBH staff. If you can just raise your hand, yay, for doing this. Yep.
The QR code.
Yep. And so this is the gift that keeps on giving. All of those who RSVP'd will be getting a link to this wonderful panel and to the interview with Ray. We also have a tremendous link, if you do this QR code right here, to resources. Ways in which to help with, wage disparities, getting that next job, mentoring like Connexión does, as well as resources to help you buy a home and to get onto that road of prosperity. So just take that QR code and please share it with everyone, but we will also be sending it out in an email.
All right, and just look forward to having you all back with us again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and see you next time.